Welcome everybody to our open mic. I am so glad to see such a full room on such a beautiful evening because we have some really, really wonderful featured readers and poets this evening, and I'll introduce them briefly. And please, when you're here, say as much as you want about the work you do and your history. Our theme this month is freedom, independence, Juneteenth. And first up is a Middlebury poet, Steve Parlato. Steve's a poet, novelist, artist, professor emeritus from Naugatuck Valley Community College. A cool guy. All right, Steve.
What a great group of people. Wow. It's so nice to see so many seats filled on a beautiful June evening. Welcome, and again, thank you, Sandy. If you know Sandy Carlson, you know that she is a wonderful person and promoter of poetry and arts. I have been the benefit of that many times over, so thank you. I wanted to start with a poem, not by me. It is a poem by the great Langston Hughes, and it's a poem that when I was teaching literature and composition, I always did a chapter on the Harlem Renaissance. And now that I'm teaching art, I teach a drawing class, and one of the first assignments that I give is to just draw in response to this poem. And it's a good way to get the creative juices flowing and also to gauge the room. So the poem is called I Too Sing America. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll sit at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. And so we usually have a conversation around that poem, and then my students start drawing, and it's kind of amazing what comes out of it. I have a few of my poems, and I wanted to give you some context. I discovered that today is the 61st anniversary of the murder of Medgar Evers. And so I brought a portrait with me. I've been working on a series of portraits, and the series is called They Are Not Disposable. And each one portrays a Black American whose life was stolen because of racial violence. The collages are all created using stuff that you would throw away, household discards like pizza boxes and magazine pages and leftover wrapping paper. So I don't have a poem yet written for Mr. Evers, but I'm writing a poem to go with each of the 16 collages. And the subject's initials are in the work, and when they're displayed in the proper order, it spells out Black Lives Matter. So the first poem, the opening poem of the collection, is called Hosting the Stolen. For Brianna, Tamir, Cynthia, Rayshard, all the rest. Lacking the melanin required for membership, I have become host to meetings of the stolen. With no preset time or day, they come to me late and early, straight from drive-through lanes and snow-scudded city parks, from Bible circles, from sleep-tangled sheets, from family visits to the treacherous Jim Crow South. Navigating the fields of judgment, river of lies, they lined my squat couch to share their aspirations, their daily joys, daughter dancing, skittles and sweet tea, their undoings. Laying down the weapon of my whiteness, I follow each doomed soul into the reeds of sorrow, knowing I must emerge alone, must ready to welcome the next. So the series began as I was about to, it was in spring of 2020. And we all know what happened in spring of 2020, the pandemic and George Floyd's murder, two forces that came together in a very powerful way. And wanting to do something, but not feeling very comfortable marching at the time, I decided to create a portrait of Breonna Taylor because it was her birthday. And I had been saving up junk to make artwork that would speak to the climate crisis. I'm a member of a group called Poets for the Planet. One of my fellow members is here, Sina. And I decided to use some of the materials in this other way. And it turned into a calling for me. So over my sabbatical that fall, I committed to doing this series. There is a portrait of Tamir Rice, and the poem that accompanies that is called Footprints in Snow. Elegy for Tamir Rice. In drifted fields, my mind spirals, leaping to that child's footprints in November snow. Circling, labyrinthine, as he ducks and points. Can you hear his laughter? A broken toy gun. Oh, to slow time, to halt the skidding cruiser, seize the fatal bullet from its chamber, freeze this moment in autumn ice. Oh, to rewind that day, back, before the gazebo, before the blood, reroute his steps back to rec center potter's wheel, crochet table, to undo the fatal swap of phone for gun, to keep him safe. But being a boy and just 12, of course he answers the gun's siren call. Boys always, despite mother's warnings, answer. Once our son's friend Michael, barred from play weapons, gnawed his toast into a pistol, pointing, powing at breakfast. They praised him for resourcefulness, that blue-eyed freckled boy. But this gone child? They say his blackness, his bigness at 12 sealed his fate. They blame him for giving that white cop cause to shoot. It's June, so in addition to Juneteenth next week, we know it's Pride Month. And so the next poem is for an individual named Tatiana Hall, and she was a young trans black woman. And we know that the violence besetting that community is just epidemic. The poem is called Of Boys and Beauty. For Tatiana Hall. If butterflies could scream, I wonder, would boys still rip their wings off? Would they laughing grind iridescence between grimy fingers, appendage shreds dropping to dirt? Would they still savage milkweed just to snatch a hidden chrysalis, smear it against asphalt, scorch it with sunlight through a polished bottle shard? When girls scream, some boys will grin and slit open a cocoon, pinch its wriggling tenant, squish her in an eager fist, squelching beauty. Does beauty threaten these boys? Frighten them? Does it echo the softness boys strive so hard to hide? For a time, one small child managed to mask softness in layers of swagger. But the tight cocoon spun, bruised more than those other boys' fists. Besides, beauty insistent always emerged in the swan neck, arched brow, the joy at purple, despite all efforts to suppress it. At last, shedding this cocoon, a new self emerged, a glint and gossamer, Tatiana. But her bright life was brief as a butterfly's. They found her, wings torn off, colors weeping onto blacktop. Entomologists claim that larvae feel no pain as their bodies digest themselves, that butterflies have no memory of their former selves. Do I have time for one? Okay. Maybe a couple more. Elijah McClain is probably a name that many of you are familiar with. Aurora, Colorado, a young man just before the pandemic walking home from a convenience store wearing a mask because he had a medical condition where he was always cold. Someone called the police, reported him for acting strangely, and he ended up dying at the hands of paramedics who injected him with ketamine, a horse sedative. I learned a lot about each of the subjects. I wanted to know them as I was creating their portraits. And something that I learned about Elijah was that he had taught himself to play violin, and he volunteered at an animal shelter and played his music to calm the animals. So the poem is titled Shelter Cats More for Elijah McClain. The old Abyssinian clears her throat. Her whiskers flake impatient as kittens dart weave in eager rows. They've coaxed her into sharing their favorite fable, the one about the black angel, and how he poured his music through cage mesh, his melodies kissing temple tufts, caressing silk backs. Soft as gauze felt, mouse cheeks, his tunes were shields for strays' ears, softening the sharp buzz clank of armored doors, soothing the hissing mule of new arrivals. Too young, too new to have known his bright there-ness, they shiver still in his ever absence, wondering at the cold silence of his lost violin. And I'll share one more. It's another story of a young man, Victor Demarius Steen. You may not be as familiar with his name. He was from Pensacola, Florida, and he was pedaling his bicycle home late one night and passed a construction site, and a policeman in a cruiser suspected him of stealing from the construction site. In fact, he was pedaling home from helping to plan a child's birthday party. A member of the family was having a birthday the next day. And the policeman chased him in his cruiser, and when Victor pedaled away for fear of his life, the policeman tased him out the window of the cruiser, and Victor fell from his bike and was pulled beneath the cruiser and killed. Right? I think of my son, who will be 27 next in August, and the fact that had he been a 16 or 17-year-old pedaling past a construction site in the evening, a cop might have said, "Be careful," but would not have hunted him down as if on safari. The poem is titled Never Ask a Black Mother for Cassandra Steen. If you could foretell another future, who would your Victor be? A high school grad? An architect? Proud dad to 2 giggling girls? Do you sit still, his pictures before you, tracing the seashell whorl of his ear, studying his notched brow arched in endless wonder? Or have you tucked his images away, like Mary, to ponder in your heart? And how does your half-heart manage to beat absent your stolen son? Do you retreat to dreams, and in those dreams does he appear a knee-bobbled toddler to make you beam? Or do you flee sleep, its darkest dreaming, your child spilled out on asphalt, no time to gasp, cry out for you from beneath that cop's cruiser? Did you really believe he'd heed your mother warnings about dark nights and lightless bikes, your lullaby, comply, comply, at 17? Would it matter? When all it takes is one cop looking to make the streets safe from black boys pedaling by? Dare I ask, can you forgive your husband for teaching the child to ride a bloody bike? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Peggy Anson. She's been a member of the community theater at Woodbury Board. I'm sorry, I'm gonna mess with that. Peggy Anson has been a member of the community theater at Woodbury Board since early 2020 after being introduced to CTAW through a friend. Peggy began volunteering at the theater and utilizes her experiences as a senior HR executive supporting staff, planning staff development, succession planning, and talent transitions as they occur on the board. So wow. And this from Marla, our adult programming librarian. During the COVID era, Peggy, along with Lauren Ray, joined forces with the WPL to present Letters of Note, a multi-week virtual presentation of live readings by CTAW members of letters by famous and infamous people. The readings delighted our community. Thank you, Peggy, for being here.
Thank you, Steve. Took me back into my childhood.
Thank you.
There were some good things, but there were some things that weren't so good, so thank you for that. As Sandy said, a few years ago actually, I, along with a team of, I forget how many of us there were, chose to read from a collection called Letters of Note. And each of these letters had been archived by an author who wanted to identify some things that we wouldn't ordinarily have been exposed to in our history. Some of them were quite funny, some of them were quite poignant, and I chose two of them to read, which particularly impacted me and my way of thinking. The first letter is written by W.E.B. Du Bois. No, that's my French teacher. W.E.B. Du Bois. I keep thinking how my French teacher would put his name and say something. But anyway, he was a sociologist. He was a civil rights pioneer. He was the first African-American person to receive a doctorate from Harvard. He was extremely passionate about education. He had a daughter whose name was Yolanda, and reading about her, she reminded me a bit of myself. She got on her parents' nerves, and at about the age of 12 or 13, her parents decided to send her away to school. Fortunately, my parents didn't have that kind of money, so I stayed in a public school locally. However, Yolanda was sent to school in Europe, which was quite uncommon at that time. And the letter that her father wrote her, dated October 29, 1914, is a way of providing her a sense of self. Dear little daughter, I have waited for you to get settled before writing. By this time, I hope some of this strangeness has worn off and that my little girl is working hard and regularly. Of course, everything is new and unusual. You miss the newness and smartness of America, I am sure. Gradually, however, you are going to sense the beauty of the old world, its calm and eternity, and you will grow to love it. Above all, remember, dear, that you have a great opportunity. You are in one of the world's best schools, in one of the world's greatest modern empires. Millions of boys and girls all over this world would give almost anything they possess to be where you are. You are there by no desert or merit of yours, but only by lucky chance. Deserve it then. Study, do your work. Be honest, frank, and fearless, and get some grasp of the real values of life. You will meet, of course, curious little annoyances. People will wonder at your dear brown and the sweet crinkly hair. But that simply is of no importance and will soon be forgotten. Remember that most folk laugh at anything that's unusual, whether it is beautiful, fine, or not. You, however, must not laugh at yourself. You must know that brown is as pretty as white or prettier, and crinkly hair as straight, even though it might be harder to comb. The main thing is the you beneath the clothes and skin, the ability to do, the will to conquer, the determination to understand and know this great, wonderful, curious world. Don't shrink from new experiences and custom. Take the cold bath bravely. Enter into the spirit of your big bedroom. Enjoy what is and not pine for what is not. Read some good, heavy, serious books, just for discipline. Take yourself in hand and master yourself. Make yourself do unpleasant things so as to gain the upper hand of your soul. Above all, remember your Father loves you and believes in you and expects you to be a wonderful woman. I shall write each week, and I shall expect a weekly letter from you as well. Lovingly yours, Papa. I had mentioned to Marla that I was interested in reading something that had been banned, the banned book or something that had been banned. And I decided instead to read something from Maya Angelou's illustrious collections. I'm not going to tell you who she is. You know who she is. But the book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, is based on a poem, which honestly very few people talk about because the book had such notoriety. Caged Bird was the poem on which the book was built. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream until the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through the bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of the things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze and the trade wind soft through the sighing trees and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The last one I will read was one of the favorite things I read during our letters of note. I hope you enjoy it as much as I. The author of this is a former slave. His name is Jordan. Jordan was born in 1825 in Tennessee. He died in 1907. He was sold as a slave at age 7 or 8 to General Paulding Anderson. And because of this ownership, he subsequently was given to the general's son as the son aged, became a little older. Jordan's last name became the last name of his slave master, which was the tradition at that time. The young boy, the slave owner's son, was actually receiving Jordan as his own personal servant at the age of 7 and playmate. The two were of similar age. Now, Jordan was freed in 1864 by the Union Army. He immediately left Tennessee, first going to Nashville and then settling in Ohio. He worked as a servant, a janitor, a coachman, a stableman, and then he became a sexton at a local Methodist church. Here is Jordan Anderson's letter. It is entitled, "A Freed Man Writes His Former Master," if you decide to look for it in letters of note. Dayton, Ohio, August 7, 1865. To my old master, Colonel P.H. Anderson, Big Spring, Tennessee, sir. I got your letter and was glad to find that you had not forgotten Jordan, and that you wanted me to come back and live with you again, promising to do better for me than anybody else can. I have often felt uneasy about you. I thought the Yankees would have hung you long before this. For harboring Rebs they found at your house. I suppose they never heard about you going to Colonel Martin's to kill that Union soldier that was left by his company in their stable. Although you shot me twice before I left you, I did not want to hear of you being hurt. And I am glad that you are still living. It would do me good to go back to the dear old home again and see Miss Mary and Miss Martha and Alan, Esther, Green, and Lee. Give my love to them all and tell them I hope we will meet in a better world. I would have gone back to see you all when I was working in the Nashville hospital, but one of the neighbors told me that Henry intended to shoot me if he ever got the chance. I want to know particularly what the good chance is you propose to give to me. I'm doing tolerably well here. I get $25 a month with victuals and clothing. I have a comfortable home from Mandy. The folks here call her Mrs. Anderson. And my children, Millie, Jane, and Grundy, go to school and they are learning well. The teacher says Grundy has a head for a preacher. They go to Sunday school and Mandy and me attend church regularly. We are kindly treated. Sometimes we overhear the others saying, them colored people were slaves down in Tennessee. The children feel hurt when they hear such remarks. But I tell them it was no disgrace in Tennessee to belong to Colonel Anderson. Many darkies would have been proud, as I used to be, to call you master. Now, if you will write and say what wages you will give me, I will better be able to decide whether it would be to my advantage to move back again. As to my freedom, which you say I can have, there's really nothing to be gained on that score, as I got my free papers in 1864 from the Provost Marshal General of the Department of Nashville. Mandy says she would be afraid to go back without some proof that you were disposed to treat us justly and kindly. And we have concluded to test your sincerity by asking you to send us our wages for the time we've already served. This will make us forget and forgive old scores. And we'll rely on your justice and friendship in the future. At $25 a month for me and $2 a week for Mandy, our earnings would amount to $11,680. And to this, the interest for the time our wages have been kept back. And deduct what you paid for our clothing and the 3 doctor's visits to me and pulling a tooth for Mandy. And the balance will show what we are in justice entitled to. Please send the money by Adams Express in care of V. Winters, Esquire, Dayton, Ohio. Now, if you fail to pay us for faithful labors in the past, we can have little faith in your promises in the future. We trust the good Maker has opened your eyes to the wrongs which you and your fathers have done to me and my fathers, in making us toil for you for generations without recompense. Here I draw my wages every Saturday night, but in Tennessee there was never any payday for the Negroes any more than for the horses and cows. Surely there will be a day of reckoning for those who defraud the laborer of his hire. In answering this letter, please state if there would be any safety for my Millie and Jane, who are now grown up, both good-looking girls. You know how it was with poor Matilda and Catherine when we were there. I would rather stay here and starve and die, if it come to that, than have my girls brought to shame by the violence and wickedness of their young masters. You will also please state if there has been any schools open for the colored children in your neighborhood. The great desire of my life now is to give my children an education and have them form virtuous habits. From your old servant, Jordan Anderson. P.S. Please say howdy to George Carter and thank him for taking the pistol from you when you were shooting at me. all the stories I heard from my grandparents and so on were all, I'm sure, true. This grandparent had education to this level and so on. But when I read this letter, it gave me a sense of this person's wit, the sense of humor, the level of intelligence that wasn't well known or wasn't being taught to us as we were growing up. What we were taught were other things, but not this level of capability intellectually. And so I appreciate this letter tremendously for those reasons. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Our third featured presenter today is Rick Richardson, a local attorney and co-founder of Justice Southbury. Rick, when you're up here, I hope you'll tell the group more about the important and brave work that Justice Southbury has accomplished over the past 4 years consistently. Thank you very much, Rick.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you for putting this together. And thank you all for coming and for supporting the arts. These kinds of programs obviously are important and wonderful. I'm delighted to be here. I'm not sure you will be so delighted when you hear from me. As a poet, I'm a lawyer, so apologies in advance. As Sandy said, I'm the co-founder of a group called Justice Southbury. Some of you have heard of it, some of you have been to our rallies, many of you probably have not. If you go back in time to when the pandemic started in March of 2020, I was like probably a lot of you. I thought I'm smart, I'm educated, I think about these things, I think about values and morals, I think about politics, I think about race relations, and I have lots of opinions about these things. I didn't do a darn thing about it. And after George Floyd was murdered at the end of May of 2020, like pretty much everywhere in America, a group of people gathered in Southbury on the Green. I wasn't one of the leaders, I was one of the followers, but my wife and I and our 3 daughters decided we needed to go. We held up signs, and there were about 190 people there, lined up along the road, and all basically saying enough. What can we do? We've got to do something. There was a black man that was walking along the line with a video camera, videoing everybody and just saying thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And my family was at the very end. So when he finished, we were there, and he turned the video around on himself and said, in a very emotional way, I never knew my community would do this for me. And the following week, the following week, one of my daughters, her friends had seen the post that she put on Instagram and said, that would look amazing. Are you guys going to do it again? And so she asked me if we're going to do it again. I said, I don't know, I didn't do it, we just went. I asked the people who organized this, are you going to do it again? They said, no, we've got too much going on, we can't do it again. And I said, well, can we borrow your signs and we'll do it again? So we went out the second week, we got 250 people there. And we thought, wow, that was great, that was wonderful. And as the crowd was breaking up a little bit, an elderly couple in their 90s, the oldest, I think probably the oldest people there, were walking away with a couple of the signs, Breonna Taylor, Black Lives Matter, say their names. They were walking to their cars with these signs, and Julia said to me, my daughter said to me, Dad, they're stealing the signs, what are you doing? We walked over, we said, do you want us to help you bring the signs back and put it in the pile? He said, no, we'll just bring them next week. And Julia looked at me and said, is there going to be a next week? I said, well, I guess there has to be now. And so there was a third week. And by the third week, there was a guy walking around with a sign that said, if you ever wondered what you would be doing during the civil rights movement, you're doing it now. And it really hit me. Because I had always been someone who said, tell my youngest daughter, Grace, and my other kids, boy, if I was in the 60s, I would have loved to have done this or loved to have done that. But you don't know what you would have done unless you're there. And so that sign hit me as okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, you think you have some good opinions about things, go prove it, go show it. And so our group was really, really motivated by the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., specifically saying, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And so we thought, well, we can't be silent. We need to be allies. We need to be out there. We need to be doing something. So we went out again in week 4 and 5 and so on. And this past Sunday was our 211th consecutive Sunday. We are out there every Sunday. If you drive by at 2 o'clock on Sundays, rain or snow, 99-degree weather, 0-degree weather, we're out there at 2 o'clock on Sundays in that little park right across the street from what I still think was the Kmart Plaza, the South Shop Plaza off exit 15. Sandy has spoken there several times. I have a feeling that Peggy and Steve are going to, I hope, accept my invitations, which I'm certainly going to give. When Steve was speaking, I thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be a hard act to follow. What am I going to say? And when I heard Peggy, it's oh good. And when I heard Peggy was called, good, she can follow it. I'm going to follow her. So, but it's our group. This month we have 5 pride rallies. So every Sunday we have pride rallies this month. We had Black Lives, we had Black History Month rallies. We had Women's History Month rallies. We talk about things, we share ideas, and we stand out by the side of the road with our signs that say in red, white, and blue, love your neighbor. And I get the finger. I get a lot of good, thumbs up and love signs and things. But I get the finger from some people, or some people who just use the one word that basically says, "I oppose everything you guys are for," which rhymes with grump. So anyway. I do very little poetry there, luckily for my group. But I was inspired to write a poem in the style of Bob Dylan. But I thought, well, what would Bob Dylan have done when a certain incident happened in August of 2020? And if you know his songs at all, if you think about his songs like The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, or Who Killed Davy Moore, my daughter Grace did a college paper about that, using that as the basis of her paper. So I was inspired to write a poem in August 2020, and I'll just give you a little bit of the background from the New York Times so to set the mood for why I wrote the poem. So on August 23, 2020, Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, was left partly paralyzed after a white police officer shot him 7 times in the back outside an apartment complex in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The shooting, which happened in front of 3 of Mr. Blake's sons, children sitting in the car, was captured by a neighbor on a video that circulated widely and rapidly on social media. Outrage spread quickly, rekindling the nationwide protest for racial justice that had followed the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other black Americans after encounters with police. Protesters poured into Kenosha in the days after the shooting, as did counter-protesters. An Illinois teenager named Kyle Rittenhouse was charged with intentional homicide in the shooting deaths of 2 demonstrators. Professional athletes in several leagues, led by the Milwaukee Bucks and the NBA, joined the protests by refusing to play games. So again, thinking, well, what would Bob Dylan have done in writing a song? And luckily, I'm a worse guitar player than a poet, so I'm not going to sing to you. But I wrote this poem and I presented it at one of our rallies, and the poem is called All Lives in Kenosha. Let's witness the story of a man, Jacob Blake. Go ahead, say his name. This news isn't fake. Shot in the back as he entered his car. Don't tell me this man was no saint and no star. A cop told him stop, so why'd he refuse? Hard to know if you're not there standing in his shoes in Kenosha. So please tell me, if all lives mattered, as you so often claim that they do, then why was this man's spine shattered? Shot in the back in Kenosha, nothing new. Let's witness the story of a cop with a gun. Was he scared? Was he mad? Or was he just done? One shot in the back might begin a debate, but how do you claim the next 6 shots weren't hate? Shooting on video like there's no life to lose. Hard to justify, even if you are there standing in his shoes in Kenosha. So please tell me, if all lives mattered, as you argue again and again, then why was this community shattered? Excessive force in Kenosha, targets on black men. Let's witness the story of a teen with a gun, believes he's a patriot for all that he's done, aspires to law enforcement but can't wait to kill, so goes to a protest with a way and a will. Young gunman, young Trump fan, anti-black anti-Jews. What kind of evil stuffs a teen killer into his shoes in Kenosha? So please tell me, if all lives mattered, including the 2 this man killed, must we cry out for his future too, shattered? Blood on the streets of Kenosha, blood so tragically spilled. But don't stop the telling until the picture's complete. Let's witness the story of 3 boys in the back seat, watching their father gunned down in their faces, learning too young of the power of races. The color of their skin, a debt they didn't choose. Now we all need to join them and stand in their shoes in America. So go show them all lives truly matter. There's no less than any white men. Build for these young boys a ladder. They were there in Kenosha. Pray never again. The postscript to that poem. 4 months after the shooting of Jacob Blake, the Kenosha County District Attorney announced that the officers involved in the shooting would not be charged. In October 2021, the Justice Department said it would not be pursuing federal civil rights charges against the officer who shot Mr. Blake, closing its investigation. Kyle Rittenhouse testified that he acted in self-defense and was acquitted by a jury. I would invite anyone who, if you're here, it's because you are interested in life. If you're interested in life, and if you heard all of the poems tonight and said, well, that all stinks, I don't like any of it, then you probably should not come to one of our rallies. If you heard in all of this tonight a plea to people like us, I mean, every single person in this room, with one exception, is white, but we can all be allies. And so if you're inspired by that, and you say, well, I'd like to, what can I do? What can anyone do? What can people do? You can come to one of our rallies. There's lots of other things you can do, of course, but you can come to one of our rallies on a Sunday afternoon too. We're there every single Sunday. And we really enjoy the contributions that people make. Just to being part of something that is not partisan, it is not religious, but we use love your neighbor as the basis of everything we do, with the idea that if you build from there, you end up in good places. And so we challenge people who oppose us, and we say, you tell me where you start. I'll start at love your neighbor, you tell me where you start, and we'll see what happens. We're going to be a little bit rude because my daughter and her boyfriend have to drive down to Washington, D.C. tonight, so we won't be able to stay for the rest of the Poetry Slam. But thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for coming. It's an honor.
Thanks, Rick. And I think another aspect of Justice Southbury, the Zooms that you guys make available to people with practical how to think, how to engage activities, as well as things that come up in the community that you guys get proactive about. So very, very worthwhile. Thank you very, very much. That was an amazing film. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And we'll open it up as an open mic now. We are very informal about that. If somebody has a poem to read, if you would just start by saying your name, and if you want to say something about yourself, go ahead, and then share what you got.
Steve, you are amazing.
Thank you, my friend.
Everybody, amazing. So my name is Thomasina Levy. I live in Litchfield. I'm actually a songwriter, but I also realized that in writing songs, I'm also writing poems. So I started writing poems, and I'm now in a writers group with Steve Parlato and some amazing writers. So I took a picture, I don't know if you can see it, from my backyard. This is totally untouched, in January, and I kept saying, the sky is on fire this morning. I thought it would be a great poem to start with. The sky is on fire this morning. Azure gray settles atop sherbet bands of delicate peach and lilac, melting upon a golden horizon peeking behind the marshy forested wetlands. After shuffling downstairs in my tattered robe, I carefully grind the coffee beans while listening to a catastrophic scenes playing out across the world. Scattered families huddle in leveled debris, while anxious kin await news of kidnapped relatives' fates. Both factions handicapped by ruthless leaders unmoved by their pleas. I step outside with a silent prayer, casting thoughts of peace to the morning air.
Hi everybody, I'm Julie Cook. I started writing a poem after I visited the Mark Twain house, probably a year ago, or I don't remember how long ago. And it ended up, something didn't feel right about it. It was, I was going into all different civil rights figures and history, abolitionists, and it was like, well, where am I going? So I got some advice from Sandy, who I'm in her poetry group, and rewrote it. So here it is, and it's called Illumination. In Mark Twain's Hartford house, there is a fireplace in every room. But even with electrified gas lights, the somber gloom hangs everywhere like a specter. In the cloistered foyer and the dining room where Sam held forth with cigar-tinged stories, in the girls' bedrooms and schoolroom, and on the top floor in his billiard table hideaway, where he wrote the tale of friendship between a white boy and a black man. It's the story of a river journey, of adventure and crisis, a toppling of inherited roles, and the emergence of questions. Can a black man be surrogate father to a white boy who has been taught that blacks are owned property and inferior? Would anyone but a fully realized man protect his white companion from the shock of seeing his drowned father? Would he share practical advice to keep the boy safe, or sacrifice his freedom to care for an injured white boy? And what of the boy who cares for the man when he sickens from a snake bite, who lies to slave hunters to protect him, who holds his inherited beliefs up to the light and considers a new choice? As they travel downriver, invisible currents alter their plans and carry them to a new place where old assumptions stretch and rip apart. Samuel Clemens pierces the gloom with a clarity that illuminates both boy and man. We are equally worthy of freedom from abuse, and our hearts are capable of great love. The second poem was inspired by a picture from a book, an old book from 1925 of all the schools in New Britain. There were pictures. I'm from New Britain. This was in my mother's things. And in front of every school was the faculty of each school. And the faculty was pretty much 99% made up of women. And there's a reason for that. So I was really inspired by this, and I think the ideas of independence and freedom will come through in this poem, entitled 1925, Ruby. 13 women pose for a photograph on the steps of a school. Young, bright and smiling, with stylish bobs and modest skirts. They seem proud to be teachers, to be modern, independent women. You wouldn't guess that underneath their patterned skirts and long sweaters, they were bound by the tight ropes of a contract that swore their promise never to be immodest or unpatriotic or complain to the school's principal, never to go dancing or fall in love or get secretly married, to always sleep 8 hours each night, to eat carefully, stay in good spirits, be willing servants to the school board. They vowed to cheerfully donate time and money to Sunday school, to always be a lady, and to never attain the advanced age of 41, at least while so employed. It seemed a better deal than working in the factory making ball bearings, though teachers' pay was certainly less. But look at this coterie of women, how comfortable they seem, how the one in front with shiny crimped hair and dazzling smile leans her arm on her friend's knee. You just know she's the one who'd be slipping out at night for a movie, bringing girlfriends to parties with men, jazz, and like gin. These were daring times, after all, and somehow she knew there were others right behind her. Waves of women pushing open the heavy door to freedom, one more chink.
Hi, I'm Lynn Northrop, and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One is on a more serious note, and another is one of my many poems of do I or can I fit in or not? Okay. So this is to fit in or not to fit in. What do you do when fitting in feels too tight? When sliding into socially approved spaces causes you to sneeze uncontrollably. You can pretend to fit in and load up on allergy pills, wear the uniform of everyday life, and walk carefully. But the twitching in your right eye will give you away. So forget the dark glasses. Keep pushing against pious platitudes. Keep parading past the naysayers. And where do you go when you don't fit in? You sit in cafes sipping subversive thoughts that spill into poems that ask why and why not. To survive, the survival of the unfit is precarious. Their journey unpredictable. But they pick up the broken pieces of human thought and shape them into something new. It's a windy path tread only by the hardy, who embrace their exile, leave behind the congested roads of conformity, and claim their right to be free. So that's one of my ways I was complaining one day, I guess. This is one that I wrote in relationship to George Floyd. Just thinking about how I study a lot and read a lot about the rights of nature movement in the world, the indigenous movement in the world, and how the rights of nature and social justice are so connected. And then I start thinking, listen, nature is full of color, isn't it?
Yeah.
Amazing. And then we let ourselves be categorized by color. And it's used against people. And so this was one of my little poems when I had heard a couple years ago when it was George Floyd, untimely and tragic death. I live inside my whiteness, but it's too tight, too small a life. I hear you, George Floyd. The air around me is too thin. The company I keep is too white. Like the cruel act of Chinese foot binding, I've been shaped and twisted into something I never wanted. Separated by race, separated by class, by my own complicity. The irony being that when I was young, I spent hours in the sun, so I could be brown. Brown like you, George Floyd. We were kept apart so we couldn't know each other's beauty, so we couldn't know the inside of each other. I wept inside my White House. I wept as I watched you struggle, and now trapped in my whiteness, isolated by my whiteness, alone In my whiteness, I can't breathe. So,
My name is Scott Moore. I have written a poem for this evening. And if any of you have ever wondered why it took over 100 years to overturn separate but equal, this poem is for you. It takes a little bit of abstract thought, sit back, think anthropology, think Mennonite, think Native American. It takes place in a courtroom. First, the anthropology. If you have some working knowledge of anthropology, there's organizations of the way we organize ourselves over time has been at times tribal. And what we think of today is the modern state organization of government, the way we know and the way we live now. Over the years, I've had many Native Americans and Mennonite individuals as clients. And the traditional Native American way of governing requires unanimity, something like Quakers. And the Mennonites, if you're not familiar with the Mennonite religious order, is similar to Amish, but with technology. And I had the honor of being invited to a Mennonite wedding once, my wife and I. And the Mennonites do not believe in participating in government as we know it. They refuse to sit on juries. The reason? Only God can judge human beings. This poem is titled Independence Day. Human beings are not very good at judging each other. What is the modern anthropological state but a fiction? A recognized collection of human beings with authority to remove and jail other human beings. What is a human being but error-prone? What is prosecutor? Acting for government, but error-prone. Who is defense attorney, but a truth teller for a collection of human beings with true but invisible rights, but in the way? Who is juror, but in the way? Remove defense attorney, thinks prosecutor. And one wall is gone. Acts on it, and it is done. Convict, argues prosecutor to juror. The last remaining wall. But juror sees truth and quietly replies, no. Independence Day. Thank you.
I dared myself to do this. Having met Sandy last week in Southbury, and having read my first poem, I have a couple of poems here that I'm not going to explain. I'm just hoping that they will speak for themselves. I have to mention the reference to the Mennonites, as that is my background.
oh wow.
years ago. Breath and heartbeat interweave, mold the lives we live, give us nurture, means to give. Breath and heartbeat entangle, create the new, give us hope, desire to live. That plan of spanning spaciousness, trapeze in place before full flight of motion, power of grasp, both hands and feet tether in tension, a notion of grace before release. I am a pilgrim in search of peace. Fingers grasping tightly, body trusting, just not quite ready. Release will be the moment of suspension in the universe. Time will have its way with inevitable flight. My time is my time to finally get it right. I hope this sounds the way I feel it to be. This is about humility. I am a sleeping fish at the bottom of the sea. I dream the dreams of all organic life surrounding me. That flowering and rippling form, that rhythmic swimming motion, proof of something new. Death, as well, finds itself here too. That stillness, though, as ripples dissolve, makes space for rebirth. I watch and wait, take in as needed, release what has no place in the being that is me.
Hi there, I'm Ed Zitko, and I'm not going to read one of my own tonight. I was listening to everybody, and I had a Civil War poem that would have gone with what Peggy was talking about. I had a poem about the Civil Rights Memorial in Birmingham and Montgomery that would have gone with what Rick was talking about. But this was the one I originally wanted to read, and it happens to just piggyback on the way Steve started. This is by Langston Hughes, called Freedom. Freedom will not come today, this year, not ever, through compromise and fear. I have as much right as the other fellow has to stand on my own 2 feet and own the land. I tire so of hearing people say, let things take their course, tomorrow is another day. I do not need my freedom when I'm dead. I cannot live on tomorrow's bread. Freedom is a strong seed, planted in a great need. I live here too. I want my freedom just as you.
And you know, thinking about this theme of freedom, independence, Juneteenth, I was thinking about Ed Edelson, who used to be first selectman of Southbury, and during COVID, he published a book for children called Lois's Story, which is how Southbury rallied together to keep the Nazis from building a training camp in the Kettletown section of town. And what's hilarious about it is they used the blue laws to buy time and force those to buy time to change zoning regulations. And the hilarious part of that is when local people discovered that the Nazis were building on a Sunday, they said, oh, that's in violation of the blue laws, we can get them stopped. When they went to find the Justice of the Peace, he was busy violating the blue laws because he was working on his car. So he dried his hands off on a towel and issued the warrant. They arrested the Nazis, kept them long enough to change the zoning laws to say the only people who can build military training camps in Southbury is the U.S. government, and that sent the German-American Bund, which had established itself in Stamford, Connecticut, packing. And when we think about our freedoms and how fragile they are and how it seems like every 100 years we're reasserting what we stand for, I think it's worth thinking about that. And if you get your hands on a copy of Lois's story, if you just Google it up, you'll see all the backstory of how that book came into being and all the work Ed Edelson did to get the book promoted, but it's also its curriculum in Region 15. And it's an amazing story, I won't get into it, but at the 80th anniversary of everybody doing that in Southbury, there was a big commemoration, and Ed had invited me to write a poem to commemorate it, which scared the heck out of me because that seemed like a big deal, but and it was, and I was scared, but I did it, and I wanted to bring that poem here today because I think it's important to think about we can do what we can do right where we are, and we don't need the big invitation. And things like zoning and blue laws can be our friends in terms of protecting freedoms for everybody. Southbury, Connecticut defeats local Nazis in 1937. Invoking the Muses. Hear the voices of Southbury's leaders recalled for their moral courage at a dangerous time. Preaches the Reverend Felix Manley of Southbury Federated Church. Un-American inhabitants cannot tear down what has been built so slowly at so much cost. Insists Jenny Hinman, the town's leading citizen and oldest taxpayer. The display of emblems indicating allegiance to a foreign power on public roads or streams in this community shall be prohibited. Resolves the Reverend M.E.N. Lindsay of South Britain Congregational Church, I am compelled by the nature of my office to warn my people of the evil consequences of such movements, and to this end must address myself at the time of discourse during the Sunday morning worship hour. Southbury lays down the law. Consider this response to well-placed words. Well-organized Yankees lift their voices to defend rural Southbury, their home, from American Nazis gaining ground in Kettletown by calling constables to stop Nazi camp construction on a Sunday in 1937. First, blue laws. Next, Newcastle zoning policies protect a farming people at peace with hard-won freedom, inherited truths that make no way for hatred's marching tunes. Southbury makes the rules and plays by them. No training camp for fascist families here. The lesson? Know what you stand for, then stand. Community thrives when respect for law frees every citizen from hatred's thrall. Postscript. After the slaughter of European Jews and the leveling of landscapes, Eleanor Roosevelt warns us to learn. We let our consciences realize too late the need of standing up against something we knew was wrong. I hope in the future we are going to remember that there can be no compromise at any point with the things we know are wrong. Learn it. Those who treat life as their toy, death as their tool, if these men be immune, the law has lost its meaning, and we must all live in fear. What will you do when the menace draws near? Antiphon. An elderly Jewish survivor recalls this pivotal childhood moment when he fled Hitler's war for a new world. The fog lifted, and there it was after all. The Statue of Liberty. After all, I see it all. Now, after all these years, the taste of freedom here. Thank you.